Hi, I'm Brad Knowles, producer of Friday Night Flies, hosted by Scott LeBoldus and Scotty Holmes. Enjoy the show. Here we go, another episode, Friday Night Flies. Your host with the most, Brad Knowles. I'm sitting in front of my dirty fly tying table right now. It's covered with Chironomid building materials. Lots of threads, lots of wraps, lots of different ingredients. You got to have all that good stuff when you're tying chironomids. But anyhow, what I've got here is the good old Tom Thumb. We'll go down there quickly. That is what you call a dry fly, an emerger. So what happens with this little fella is that if you spend any time out on the water this time of year, especially when all them chironomids start wiggling their way up to the surface, they eventually make it there if the fish doesn't eat them. And then what they'll do is they'll push themselves out of this kind of cocoon-like husk and kind of stand up and this so what happens is the back end here is the case pushes off, and then the fly stands up out of it, and they just push themselves up and out, and they kind of wiggle their wings a little bit, and then poof, they fly away. Well, that is a very easy, delicious target for trout when it's sitting up on the surface trying its best not to wiggle too much and make too much attention to itself. Not only do trout feed on these, but you'll find sparrows. I'm trying to think of the others, not starlings, but there's a whole bunch of little birds that fly around, and they'll eat on these guys as well just prior to the hatch. And then once the hatch, you'll see the flies all kind of work their way up a little higher up into the atmosphere, and then you'll see the fish hover, or the birds will be hovering above you 20 or 30 feet just snacking like crazy on them. But the reason we're tying this is because we're doing another contest, because that's what we do here at Friday Night Flies during the pandemic. We want people to feel good about being at home, tying flies, getting ready for the new upcoming fly season. Give me 2 seconds. I'm going to look in my goodie box here, see what else we got. And while we're at it, I got so much stuff to give away here. It's crazy. So we're giving away stuff. Oh, and while we're at it, we should tell. I got another roadie kit too. Let's go do a roadie kit. Oh, I got so much good stuff here. You know what? We gave away a roadie kit, but we'll give away, you know what? Even better. Why don't we do something, you guys that are die-hard fly tiers out there, and there's so much good stuff in here. Oh, well, we've got 4-ounce bottles of Solarez. This is the thick, good for building heads on those big flies. And then I've also got the application tips, but I've also got the thin. So the winner of this week's fly tying contest will get a 4-ounce tube of Solarez in either thin or thick, your choice. That's a pricey little bottle of goodness right there. But this is the rules for this contest. The reason I'm tying this fly today is because this was the very first fly I caught a fish on. And I can vividly remember this fly. My parents and my brother, we used to do a fair amount of hiking up into the little alpine lakes around Pemberton, and there's plenty of them. And much like yourselves out there, are very familiar with alpine lakes. They are full of life, and most of them are full of trout. Nothing gargantuous, but you can get them up to 20 inches, mostly in the 12, 14, 16 inch range in most of the alpine lakes. Occasionally you'll get into one that's got some monsters, and we don't talk about those because those are held very quietly by us professionals. Anyhow, this little guy, I remember vividly hiking into a lake, and you cast your spinners and doing this and doing that, and you're not catching too much. And my dad walked over, and there was this just a bubble float. I don't know if anybody remembers what they're all about, but you could pull the back end of it out and fill the bobber half with water, and then suddenly that becomes your weight for casting. So me being 4 or 5 years old at the time, I could whistle this thing out to the point where I could barely see it, and then I would just watch that float. And as soon as it would go under, much like a strike indicator on a fly rod, set the hook and bring that bad boy in. And I remember the very first fish, I actually got to keep it. We cooked it over a fire up in the Alpine, and it was the best eaten fish. I still remember it today. But today's contest, or this week's contest, is about you tying the fly that you caught your very first fish on. And if you haven't caught a fish on a fly yet, I want you to tie a Tom Thumb dry fly. Pretty simple pattern. So anyhow, we'll get down there. Oh yeah, before we get going, we've been doing a fair amount of fishing lately. And what have we been catching? Hold on, let's have a look. Bill Borland's in there. Oh, there's a handsome devil with a beautiful fish. See, that's my Chironomid box there. And hey, whenever you're getting into nice 3-4 pound trout while you're fly fishing, that's what brings smiles to most people's faces. And that is just one of those beautiful fish. But other than that, let's get back to tying some flies. So, what we got here is the Tom Thumb. And today, like I said earlier, we're using a size 8. You can run a size 8. That's a bit on the bigger side. I'm tying it on a bigger hook just for fly tying purposes for the audience, obviously, so that you can see what I'm tying. But I would probably tie this more in like the size 10, 12, 14, depending on where you're fishing and the size of the chironomids that are kind of come off and busting and emerging. If you got, I would tie them in a few different sizes, some different colors. This one here is gray. I also tie them in natural. You can tie them in green. You can tie them in black. There's no limitation on them. But it's just deer hair. Let's see if I got some different ones here. Deer hair. So what we've got here is deer hair body, deer body hair. This one is in brown. The French would say brune. So that's brown. Another chunky gray. I really like gray. I also tie them in black. That's black. And then you can also do them in tan or blue dun. This one here is blue dun, which is another real good one. And then natural, of course. But other than that, let's get to tying because the show must go on. And then also tonight, we've got footage from Mr. Scotty Holmes himself. So if you're using the gray, I would suggest matching it up with the thread color that you're using. So today I'm using gray deer hair. I'm using gray thread. So lock that in the vise. All we're going to do is put a little bit of thread down on the hook. It doesn't need to be anything special. Just some grit for the deer hair to kind of bind to when you're throwing it on the hook. And as you can see, I'm just building it up a little bit and roughing it. Okie dokie. So, ooh, new scissors. Tell how just touch that and the thread fell apart. So, one thing you're going to need for this is a hair stacker. They're relatively easy to use. What you're going to do is take a chunk of hair. You don't want too big for your first base, the bottom. So I usually cut way too much off the first bit here, and then I throw a little bit of it away. That's still a little too much. You're building a tail, so you don't want to have it too coarse, but you don't want it too thin because you want it to float. That's the beauty of the deer hair, is that it is the buoyancy of this fly. And the more deer hair you incorporate into this fly, the higher and drier this Tom Thumb will ride. And it typically works a lot better when it's on top and not sinking. That being said, I've caught them just under the surface, subsurface with this pattern as well. So anyhow, I'm knocking, I'm tapping away on them. Okay, so pull that guy out. You want to get rid of the scragglers. And you see how those tips are lined up real nice, black tips. You want those black tips shining. And pinch it, pull it out, and with the other hand, just pull some of those scraggly things out of there. You don't want those scraggly things in there. And pull the short ones off the other end. Alright, so what you're going to do here is you're going to lay this up on top of the, and you want it just off the back of the shank, about so. About there. And you want to cut it so that it's just shy of the end. So about right there, okay? Cut it off. Throw those tips away because you're probably not going to do too much with it. When you're working with deer hair, always have yourself a little bit of a garbage box that's kind of off the side that you can cut your hair off into, because if you just cut it onto your fly tying desk, it is going to make a mess like you've never seen before real quick. Deer hair gets into everything. So work your thread, your bobbin back up to the front, and like we said, you want to leave about a bobbin's width, bobbin's tip off the front there. You'll see here why. Okay, up on top, loose rolls, wraps to begin. Work your way back, fairly loose wraps. You want to just work your way back. Not too tight at the first, because if you do, it's going to fan that tail out, and then work your way back tighter. And you see, if you get it too tight, it'll fan that out real bad. You don't want that. And don't worry about a little bit of fuzz. Fuzz ain't going to be a problem. So, there you go. You got a little bit of a fuzz. Now, you got to take another chunk. This one's going to be a little bit thicker. You know, it's been a long time since I tied Tom Thumbs, but they're relatively easy to tie in comparison to some of the other dry flies that are out there. But I assure you, these flies are as deadly as any dry fly on the planet. You can use these in streams, you can use these in lakes, you can use these pretty well anywhere there's water. Because where there's water, there's bugs. Okay, so I'm going to thin this one out just a little bit more. You can see what I'm doing. I'm just pulling a little bit out the sides. So, same thing. We're going to fire this back in the stacker. Stack this sucker in there. Push it in. Get rid of some of these loosey-gooseys. That's the thing with working with deer hair. If you get a good deer hair, it'll have some underguard. Like if you look inside this, there's underguard. And it's kind of like dubbing. But with the dry flies, if you can pull that stuff out of there, the better off you'll be. Because that dubbing actually takes on water. So, we're doing the same thing. Tap it down a couple times. Pull it out. Whoa! Pull it out. Make sure your tips are all nice and lined up like they are. Grab onto it. Pull some of this loosey-goosey fibers out of the back. You can see what I'm doing here. I got a little fan on in the background. And then I'm going to swap hands again and pull the shorties out of the front. And as much of that dubbing as you can get. You can see a little bit of it poking out there. So now when you're tying in a Tom Thumb the other way, what you need to do is lay it back, match your tips up to your tail, and then add about a half a length of your shank. Because what you're going to do is you're going to tie it in this way and then fold it back over. So we'll do that again. There's your length of your shank right there. Tips are lined up real pretty. Take about another half to quarter and cut it off right about there. Tricky, real tricky stuff. Okay. So, you're going to line your tips up to the top. You're not going to go right to the front. Just back from the front again. Just clean that up a little. There we go. Up to the front, just back from it. Down loosey-goosey at first, holding on to it. Loose wraps at first. Loose wraps. And you can see back here, you want to go as far as the last wraps on the underbody on the tail is, and then wrap it tight coming forward. Don't worry about it, a little bit of fuzz. That ain't going to hurt nothing. The more deer hair, the more compact you make it in there, the better. And then what you're going to do is take all that front wing back over, hold on to it for a second, pull it forward. There we go. Work your bobbin back up to the front, like so. Pulling it all forward. Pulling it all forward, keep it tight. You want to fan it up. Another couple wraps, 3 wraps. Like so. Make sure it's all nice and tight in there, just like so. Starting to look like a Tom Thumb. And then what you're going to do is pull this wing back. Like so. Wrap up in front. Super easy. This is one of the easiest flies to tie on the planet. And you'll find after you've tied a few, like this proportion wise, it doesn't really matter. A little short on the front, a little long on the back. I use a half hitch tool, throw it up over, pull it in nice and tight, and off you go. You don't want to break that guy off like I just did, so I'm going to throw another knot in there. I'm butchering this thing, but that's okay. You guys are getting the hint. So, same thing, half hitch, couple wraps, throw it up over top, pull it off, and pull it out nice and snug. Just like so. You want to make sure that you get that other knot that I tied broke off, cleaned up. So, what you'll find when you're tying Tom Thumbs is sometimes you got to get rid of some of these little loose hairs. Like there's a loose one there that's kind of standing up, a little weird. That one's good. There's another little, it doesn't really matter if you got a couple loose ones. They're only good for about 5 or 6 fish, and then they start to fall apart. And once they start falling apart, that's when they really start catching fish. You'll find that one out real quick. And we can just clean these up a little bit. I'm only cleaning this up because I broke that one thread. And in that case, I would probably slap just a tiny little bit of head cement on top of that knot, just for the simple reason that it did break on the first go. But that's a Tom Thumb, ladies and gentlemen. One of the deadliest. You can see my side's definitely a little bit better than your guys' side is today. And I definitely prefer to tie a few more of these prior to doing these live. But it's such a simple pattern that it's hard to really mess up, as you can see. After you tie about a half dozen or so of them, your proportions start looking really good. It's probably been 4 or 5 years since I tied one. That was the very first one I tied. So proportion wise, I was like, I'm going to make it a little bit shorter in the front. So I did, and that's why it's a little shorter in the front. But either way, both of these are going to catch fish. They're going to ride high and dry. Get yourself some gink floatant or powder floatant. And before you get that fly wet, apply that floatant to it. And that'll keep it riding high and dry. So anyhow, we're going to go back up top here. We're going to sign out. It's Brad Knowles, Friday Night Flies, also known as the Fish Finder, Permanent Fish Finder. We're fielding a ton of calls right now, ladies and gentlemen. We're not going to be guiding here probably until, I want to say mid-June. We just kind of want to let this pandemic kind of roll through. Everybody's in good health, looking good. And let's let let it ride out a little bit, and then we'll get everybody out there fishing here real soon. But that being said, this week's contest, tie the fly you caught your very first fish on. It doesn't matter what kind of fish. The very first fish you caught with an artificial fly, doesn't need to be one that you tied, just the first fly that you caught a fish on. And if you haven't caught a fish while fly fishing, which you definitely got to come out with us at the Pembina Fish Finder, because we'll break that curse for you. If you haven't caught one, I want you to tie a Tom Thumb. So let's see a few Tom Thumbs out there. Either way, love you all. Hope you're staying nice and safe at home and healthy. And we've got a good show coming up. We got I got a little message set in my inbox here that Scotty Holmes is going to be on the show here real soon. So check back real soon.